to you today a little bit about a research project that I conducted with my colleagues at Arizona State University, two of them actually. I was there as well, but after we received the award, I moved to Drexel. So I actually conducted the study with my colleagues. I went back and forth for quite a few weeks to administer the research, and we've since written a bunch of stuff, and it's gotten some interesting exposure. So I want to talk with you a little bit about what I think of as the power or the value of interdisciplinary research, and how interdisciplinary teams can both ask and answer questions that disciplines by themselves probably could never generate. And in our case, it led to our being able to complete a medium risk, what they call a medium risk, clinical trial, randomized control trial, I should say, of the TASER. And so I'm going to talk with you a little bit about that. But the subtext really is kind of the value of teams from across the university getting together to do some cool stuff. So because of the subtext, I'm going to start off with a little anecdote here. So if you get 6 police officers, 6 cops around a water cooler, and I chose this because of the darts, because it kind of goes with the TASER theme. It's a little bit sinister, but I figured, what the heck. You get 6 cops around the water cooler, and you ask them a simple question: how do you solve a crime problem? Right? Cops are, we sort of think of them as the experts in crime control. Certainly they're the experts in law enforcement, so they enjoy a high degree of legitimacy in our society. And so whenever there's a crime issue, of course, we turn to the police and, what can we do to reduce crime? And so 6 cops around the water cooler, what kinds of responses do you think you get? When you ask the question, how do you solve the crime problem? So I've actually seen this in action, not really a water cooler, but sometimes standing around a patrol car. And, you get responses like, well, you need more cops. You need to make more arrests. You need more drug enforcement. There's a nexus between what goes on at school and what goes on in the neighborhood. So we need more cops in the school and more drug dogs in the school. That's what we need to solve the crime problem. And it doesn't surprise me that they come up with these potential remedies because of the paradigm through which they view their occupational mandate. These are folks to whom we give the general right to use coercive force, right? And so as a result of that, they're going to think about what they can do to solve crime through the lens of the general right to use coercive force. And the question is that really the way you tackle a complex problem like crime in a society where people are moving around a lot, people have different languages, they have different cultural backgrounds, we come from different places, we're trying to come together and make our communities safe and productive and healthy, and we want to turn to the cops for a crime problem. It's not to disparage the police, by the way. They're doing what we tell them to do, frankly. So that's how I want to start this talk, and it kind of helps me move into the way that I think about policing. As Michelle said, most of my work revolves around the ideas of police authority and accountability. I think it's because my dad was a Marine, and he really don't like being told what to do. So, I naturally congregated to kind of an occupation that leads me to question stuff. So I question, why do the police have to stop people? What is with stop and frisk? Why did it become a crime control strategy rather than just a public safety or officer safety tactic? Kind of how did we get here? So that's my lens, I guess, is to view the police and really formal authorities through a kind of a skeptical orientation a little bit, and it leads me to ask questions that sometimes the police themselves don't appreciate. But I'm very interested in technology. I'm often an early adopter. I just got the Amazon Echo Dot. It's changed my life, as my wife Henry will tell you. I talk to Alexa a lot. It's kind of weird. But I've always been an early adopter of technology. So looking at the TASER and understanding how to integrate this new non-lethal device, it's not new, but it's definitely proliferating the marketplace in American police departments and abroad. So that leads me to to talk with you about a study that my colleagues and I designed on a cocktail napkin over lunch one day in Phoenix. And I know this is tedious, by the way, so I apologize for that, but that's our basic research design. We were having lunch one day, and three of us, all criminologists, and one of us mentioned that he got a call from a lawyer, and the lawyer said, hey, I have a client who was tased by the police, and the police, right after they tased him, the police started to ask him questions. You know, Mirandized him, what that means, right? Read the rights, Fifth Amendment rights. So Mirandized him and started asking him questions, and this guy like, spilled his beans, spilled his guts, or whatever. And so the lawyer was saying, so is that legal? I mean, do we know? What do we know about the taser and its ability or its effects on people and their thinking? And so we were talking about this because the truth was that at that point in time, this is 2008, at that point, we knew a whole lot about the physiological impacts of the taser on the body. It's a safe device, unless you're on coke. You know, that's not a great time to get tased, apparently. And if you're hog-tied in a certain, well, hog, it's kind of gross, but if you're tied up in the back of a patrol car after you've been fighting and you get tased, and then they hog-tie you and push you in the car, for some reason that leads to sudden cardiac arrest. And so those are the two times you wouldn't want to have experienced a taser exposure. But other than that, Taser International will tase anybody. They don't care, because they'll tell you how safe it is from a physiological standpoint. But what we didn't know at the time was, what did it do to your brain when you were tased? And so we were talking, my colleagues and I were talking about this, and for the life of us, we could not think of a single study that had ever examined the effects of the taser on your ability to recall information, your ability to make decisions, what your motor functioning. And so we said, you know, because we're all good social scientists, what would that look like? We could totally test that. That's not. So we literally grabbed a napkin. This is not the napkin, we literally grabbed the napkin and we sketched it out. And so we said, well, clearly we'd have to get a group and we'd have to tase them, okay? Which we thought was funny because there's no way in hell our university would ever let us tase anybody. And so then we have to have a true control group, so that's at the bottom. They just sat around in the waiting room and didn't get tased. But then we thought, you know, I wonder, is it being tased that could lead to disruptions in cognitive abilities? Or is it just a mere fact of fighting with the police, like after you've been chased down? Not everybody just stands there and lets police officers tase them. First, they like to fight, you know, or run, or both. So maybe it's the exertion that, if there's any effect on cognitive functioning, it might be that it's the exertion. So we thought, we need to have an exertion group, somebody to punch a heavy bag, you know, for some number of seconds. And then we thought, is there interaction? So we decided to have an exertion group. This is the group that, like, we should have paid the most, you know? The group, first they have to punch a heavy bag for 20 seconds, and then we tase them. And let me tell you, they seem to, like, do okay with it, but that was the group that we're kind of like, guess what group you're in? You're in group number 2. So that's how we designed the study. We never for a moment, seriously never for a moment, thought that we could design a research study, you know, study like this and actually get it through the IRB. It just seemed, you know, you can't, you know, the whole Milgram thing and shocking people, it seems like we don't do that anymore, and for probably good reason. But the truth is, the police have tased 1.2 million people in America since 1986. 1.2 million people. A lot of those people are in jail now because or I should say prison, because they talked to the police and gave statements. The question was, did the statements they gave, were they based on coercion? Were the suspects unable to knowingly and voluntarily waive their rights? The Supreme Court says we have, again, to protect us against self-incrimination. So for us, you know, it sounds kind of silly and foolish and like, you know, no way will we ever get this through, but at the same time, it's a big question because we don't know. Miranda is a huge issue in society, and my field's been challenged probably 15 times since it was decided in 1966. It was finally reaffirmed, I think, for the last time in 2000 in the case U.S. versus Dickerson. But, you know, the court has refined its application, it's created exceptions, so it's a huge area of Fifth Amendment law and partially Sixth Amendment. So the question is, what does this thing do? All right, now, the big question for us is after we left and wadded up the napkin and threw it away because it was just an exercise over lunch, we thought, well, if we're going to do this, let's actually think about doing it. And so what's the next step? Well, we're not psychologists. We're not psychiatrists, and we don't normally get money to try to test the effects of a device. So we didn't exactly know where to turn. So our initial steps were to just talk to people, and that's the benefit of being a giant university like ASU was I could call people from all kinds of interesting schools and sort of run this idea by them and they're kind of like, this is never going to get through IRB. But if you really want to design something for the sake of an exercise, here's who you should talk to. And so after these initial conversations, the first two things we did was form an advisory group and affiliate with colleagues at ASU who could actually help us design an IRB protocol that tested what would probably be considered a medium risk device. So we went to the biomed. ASU doesn't have a med school, so we went to the next closest thing, which was the biomed folks, who I think at the time were in the College of Nursing and Health Innovation. So once we talked with them, they said, you've got to form an advisory group because you're not psychiatrists, you're not psychologists, you're not lawyers. You don't know exactly what you need to ask. We know we had this research design. That's not hard. That's not a difficult thing to put together. We can all put together a pretty elegant, experiment. That's not the difficult part. The difficult part is how do you measure stuff? What do you measure? Okay? And in our case, we had to learn what we didn't know. I know what I don't know a lot of times, okay? And probably all of us are the same way. I didn't know how to measure cognitive function. At least I was smart enough, and my colleagues were smart enough to know that we didn't know that. So we had to get a couple neuropsychologists on this advisory group to help us, okay? I didn't know much about electrical injury, EI. I didn't know about power line research and the research on lightning strikes, and that there's this enormous body of work out there. So we got an electrical engineer onto our advisory group. I know the laws of Miranda. I get all that. I'm pretty good at it. I think there might be 5 people in the country who know more about that than I do. However, I don't know anything about how this actually plays out in court. I've never tried a case. I've never had a client. We know nothing about that sort of thing. So we got 2 lawyers, one assistant district attorney and one assistant public defender on our advisory committee, and which was kind of funny to see them come at this from 2 totally different, ideas. So we have these folks on this committee who we think can probably help us, in addition to the biomed people. And so we had 2 things. One was, okay, we need to figure out how we're going to measure what we think we need to measure, and that was the psych people. Okay. But at the same time, we had never put together a protocol, an IRB protocol, where we had to worry about things like, sudden cardiac arrest or dislocating your shoulder because you have a torn rotator cuff, and so when you get tased, your body, tenses up, and what does that do? So we had to figure out how we were going to manage these kinds of, potential adverse events. And that was, and then of course, who's going to fund this? None of us at that point, at least from the terminology standpoint, had gone to NIH. I had gone to NIH one time for a project that didn't get funded. But we knew that our regular funding agency, the Department of Justice, probably wouldn't fund an RCT like this, but we had heard through the grapevine that they have a whole technology side that we'd never even heard of. So they fund RCTs to test technologies in the criminal justice process. So we thought that was okay. That seems like a good place to go. But then there was this question like, is the taser an FDA-approved device? If it's not FDA-approved, are we? So it took us a month just to figure out the legalities of testing the effects of an FDA-approved device on human functioning, because it wasn't. It's kind of like prescribing off-label, if you will. And so anyway, it turns out it's not FDA-approved. It's just it's not controlled by Food and Drugs Administration. So we were okay. But these are the kinds of things wouldn't even have occurred to me to ask. We would have put together a protocol, sent it in, spent months just to get a big denial, and you're kind of like, well, how'd that happen? So this team definitely helped us out. So here's the taser. This is the X26. One of the things we didn't know. So tasers exist in a broad, under a broad category of conductive energy weapons. They used to be called conductive energy devices. Somewhere along the way that changed to conductive energy weapon. So so taser is a trademark. That's a firm. They have a building in Scottsdale, Arizona, and they do everything in-house. It's like when you walk into Taser, it's like you're walking onto the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. It's an amazing building because of all the controls there, because it's proprietary, hugely controversial, totally profit-oriented, okay? But it's also a device that, if put into the wrong hands, can cause a lot of damage. So it's a very controlled, lockdown building. So it's a weird place. But, I should tell you, on our advisory committee, we also had the 2 ER physicians who contract to Taser. They were on our advisory committee. So Taser knew about this, Taser International knew about this study. They've known about it from the beginning. They were part of these 2 docs who are the ones who've done most of the studies of what it does physically to you. They were on our because we figured, they're going to find out. So we might as well try to bring them in and get their sense. And to their credit, I will say, we have a funny relationship with them actually to this day. They're 2 researchers. They get paid by Taser to go around the country and try to tell the world how our study is nice, but it's not reliable or valid. And so it's anyway, we cross paths every now and then. But they're nice guys. And they helped us out quite a bit. They helped us out especially with this. Those are the darts that come out of the Taser device, okay? And up a little closer, you can see them. They are actually, so they're called probes. You can call them darts. They look pretty nasty up close. And one of the things that one of the docs told us about was, they said, if you write this protocol and you say that you're going to tase people like this, you will never get this through an IRB for the simple fact that every time you use the device on somebody, it causes them to bleed. All right, you can probably see the barbs. They're designed to go into you and stick. That's the only way it works. Is if both probes break your skin and hold on to you. Okay, so and that has to be like between 18 and 24 inches apart. There's a whole science behind it. So they said if you write a protocol and it somehow even gets through the IRB, the problem is every time you expose somebody to a taser, you're going to have to write up an adverse event report. You're going to have 150 adverse events. You're going to get shut down. I mean, it was really interesting. They're like, you cannot shoot them. Besides, it just looked kind of bad, shooting people from, because we initially envisioned we'd have 2 people, you'd hold them up at the shoulder, and then somebody would shoot them. And the guys from Taser are like, no. You can't do that. That's politically, it looks awful. Okay, imagine if somebody whips out a cell phone and takes a video of that, number 1. And number 2, they're going to bleed every time, and no funding agency is going to allow that to happen. And we said, oh, that's really smart. We hadn't thought of that before. So what we did, and I'll show you a little bit later in the picture, but we took the tasers and we modified them. We bought 1 taser. And we modified it so that it had alligator clips on the ends where the darts are. We replaced the probes with alligator clips, so that we didn't break the skin. We just attached them to the back. And so it was interesting because we started to talk with the general counsel at ASU. So it's funny. You start off, it's a big joke, like yeah, this would never work. And then the more you talk to people, and you start saying, well, but what if we did this? And the bioengineering folks, you can do this, we can take the probes off, it's no problem, replace them with alligator clips. And, you start getting into it pretty soon, you're kind of like, huh, are we actually going to pull this off? And so we thought, well, who are we going to tase? There's no way we could ever tase college students, okay? As much as sometimes, you know what I mean, right? So there was no way, we thought. So we wrote it up so that we would have a community sample. One of the guys, there's 3 PIs on the study, me, Mike White, and a guy named Justin Reedy. Justin's a big guy from Boston. He's just happy-go-lucky. He's a little crazy, but he's a great guy. But he's crazy enough that he can sit down at a table with people and convince them to be part of the study. And it didn't even take that, So we thought we'll turn Justin loose on a shopping mall. He'll fill, we'll get 300 people, no problem. And so that was our initial strategy, was to recruit a community-based sample. The taser docs said to us, look, you don't want to stand there and actually shoot people, not just because it doesn't look right. The problem is the probes pop out. Okay, the probes pop out maybe 10% of the time. That's why sometimes on the news you hear the police tase somebody 5 times. Well, a lot of times if they're wearing heavy clothing, the probes don't penetrate, or one penetrates and the other doesn't, or they bounce off. It's not a completely reliable device. So they said the best way to do it, and the other thing too, is that from a scientific standpoint, if you want to be systematic, you shoot, sometimes the spread is 18 inches, sometimes it's 20 inches, and the amount of electricity you get into your body varies based on how long the arc is, right? So they said, here's what you need to do. Get a mat, lay people down, attach the alligator clips to their shoulder and their back, make sure it's 18 inches apart, and then just pull the trigger that way and expose them to the taser. And so we had that, we thought we were golden. Community sample, we have it down, we're going to be as humane as possible. One of the harder justifications we sort of had to come up with was, how do we justify this thing? We know the ethics of scientific research. First one, do no harm. We all know what the studies on authority, figures, and the box, shocking people through the box. They weren't being shocked, but in our case, we were really going to shock people. So our justification, our ethical justification was simply, this group themselves may not benefit personally or immediately from our research on the taser, but because 1.2 million people have already been tased, many of whom are in prison, and the use of taser is expanding enormously, our thought was it's unethical not to do some work that looks at what this does to your brain and your ability to make decisions and recall information through auditory processes. Okay, so at any rate, the argument flew, at least with ASU. However, what they said was, you're not tasing a community sample. You're tasing students. We're like, what? That's exactly the opposite of what we thought you were going to say. The reason was because the general counsel guy said, look, it's very simple. If you injure somebody out there, Joe the truck driver, no, what was the payment? Joe the plumber, okay? You injured Joe the plumber out there, we are now paying for Joe the plumber for the rest of his life, because of something that happened as a result of our study. So if Joe either has some kind of adverse event that's really serious, or if a joint dislocates or something goes on, we don't know anything about Joe. So we're much more comfortable tasing students for a variety of reasons. One, excuse me. One, students have health insurance. They have to have health insurance to come here. So right off the bat, we know that'll help with some of the financial offset if something happens. Number two, they're healthy. Students come here, they're healthy. Most of the time, they are healthy. Students tend to be healthier than your average person out there along a variety of dimensions. Okay, and so the university thought we're going to keep this in house. So we said, okay, that's fine. So we rewrote the protocol to recruit students, okay, to expose them to the taser, and they became the group of participants. That was our study group. And what was interesting about that was at the time, ASU said, look, you can do the study in one of the clinics in College of Nursing. And we had space set aside, and it was all set. We send, so that was the physical side. But then there's the next issue, which is how do we measure cognitive function? We didn't know how to do that. Like we had a sense that, okay, it has to do with the way people think and remember. And my initial response was to use what's called the Miranda Rights Comprehension Instrument, not ironically, coincidentally developed by, you can't see, by, well, initially developed by Thomas Grisso, who's very famous in the Miranda area, but then redeveloped by Naomi Goldstein, who's actually my colleague at Drexel. She works in the Department of Psychology. And so she does a ton of work on Miranda with juveniles and how juveniles can assimilate their rights to remain silent and the whole thing. So it seemed natural, because we were really interested in Miranda and how the taser might influence a person's ability to voluntarily or knowingly waive their rights, we thought naturally we would use an instrument designed to capture a person's ability to understand Miranda. You could probably all recite your Miranda rights, don't you think? You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say, Canada will be right, and the whole thing, you have a right to an attorney. And at the very end of that, they say, would you like to talk to us? Do you want to waive your rights so that you can talk to us? And most people do. Whether they did it or not, they talk to the police because they think that they can, either their innocence is going to set them free or they're going to be able to lie their way out of it. Okay? So most people talk to the police. And most people don't understand the Miranda rights. You probably didn't know this, even though you can walk around all day long reciting the Miranda warnings, there are 543 different versions of Miranda in use in the United States. And they range anywhere from the third grade level to the postgraduate level in terms of reading comprehension ability. When the court decided Miranda versus Arizona in 1966, all it said was, you have to advise suspects of these Fifth Amendment rights. It's a proscriptive, decision. Didn't say, this is the language you have to use. So as a result of that, police departments around the country have been left to develop their own versions of Miranda. And there are well over 500 of these versions around the country. So that's why this manual is so thick, by the way, because it contains a lot of these different, you're talking, so differences in sentence length, the order in which they're read, all this stuff. So in a way, Miranda, so if we're going to measure Miranda comprehension, what version do we use? That's a big question. How do you measure, how do you keep the version, like we might test a version, and the other thing, by the way, I've had a lot of coffee, so you can tell I'm talking about that. Another thing, by the way, is that we knew that the taser docs were taking notes all the time. So we knew that we initially were not going to use a taser, we were going to get another one cheaper. But somebody said, you know what, if you don't use the taser device, then taser will always say that this doesn't apply to our device. We have a different conductive energy weapon. So your study doesn't mean anything, and you've missed the vast marketplace of conductive energy weapons. So we had to use the taser. We knew we had to use the taser. We knew that if we used some version of Miranda that wasn't somehow reflective of maybe the broader population, taser would come back and say, hey, you know what, the version of Miranda you used was really complicated. It doesn't apply to most police departments, and this device doesn't. It's the version of Miranda that's really the problem. We knew because they would tell us. These are things that we learned from talking to the docs, at Taser. The psychology guys said, there were two men, they said, look, this is not going to get you where you want to go. You want to be able to conduct a study that has broader implications. Okay? If you're interested in understanding the effects of electrical injury on a participant, you need to use instruments designed to measure that. You need to, so this brought us into the field of neuropsych, where we use primarily use these two instruments, the Hopkins Verbal Learning Instrument that measure immediate auditory recall and delayed 20-minute auditory recall, and then finger tapping exercise to measure brain trauma, brain injury. We used three additional tests, but they're very complicated and they were not significant. So these are the two tests that really kind of, they help us understand auditory recall processes, and they also help us understand the finger tapping, whether the taser actually causes somebody to mimic a brain trauma, brain injury. Now, so what the psych people said, if you use a validated instrument that's already out there, you're able to then look at your participants and actually compare your sample to what we know about population norms at different age groups. So we know what the cognitive functioning looks like for a normal, healthy human being, adult. We know what it looks like for 78-year-old men. It's different, right? And so the only way we're going to be able to, what they said to us, the only way you're going to be able to really make headway in the neuropsych world is to use a validated instrument. The Miranda thing is no good. That's for your field. But you're always going to be stuck in your field. Again, great advice, because it never even would have occurred to us to consider that. And we didn't know how, so we had to go through training, several weeks worth of training, cost a small fortune, by the way, to get this kind of training, just to get the instruments that it cost. And so we were able to, so we did all that and send this thing through, and at the last minute, we were sending the protocols through we got a funder, or somebody who was interested in funding it. Send it through, you know how when you submit a grant, grants.gov, and your person submits it for you, you're like, great thing. And it starts getting routed through the university. When it got to the vice provost of the research, big fat denial. I'm like, what? We followed every one of your rules. And he said, you can't do it at ASU. And he said, well, the landscape has changed. Can't do it at ASU. So we already had, so we didn't know what we were going to do. The thing it goes off, and to the fund, we said, just let us do it, because the grant's due, today at 5. We'll figure this out later. But right now, let's at least get the grant. So we went out, the grant goes out, we got the funding, first round, they funded it. No, it wasn't an R&R, it was like, wow, okay, that's pretty cool. So we get this funding, we have to go back to the university. And by the way, we underfunded it. It was only a $500,000 grant, and we had 3 investigators on this grant. And we paid the participants $200 for this. So it was expensive, and we underfunded it because we were trying to fly under the radar, basically. And we could have pulled it off with that funding. It would have been okay. However, when the university said you're not doing this at ASU, our funder said you have to do it in a clinical setting. There has to be a place. You have to do it in a place where you're going to have defibrillators. People have to get a health screen, all this stuff. It's like, we're kind of like, well, what's this all about? So the biomed people helped us yet again. They said, you can rent the wing, the West Wing, of the Freedom Pain Center, which is a pain hospital in Scottsdale. You can rent it on the weekends. We'll have 2 ER docs for you and 2 nurses, and they'll run, folks through this thing, and that way, if anything goes on, if any adverse event occurs and they need a response, we can do it. So that cost us $50,000 that we didn't have, basically. So we paid it, we rented it, but what that meant was, much to the chagrin of my family, I didn't get paid for the last 6 months on this thing because we had to give salary back. That's a lesson to all of us. Don't underfund your research because it doesn't do you any good in the end. And so we'll never do that again. So we get to the hospital, and here we go. This is basically everything. We had a script that we had to follow. We learned from our okay. I can almost be finished here. We learned from our psych people, the order in which to administer the cognitive tests. We did the Hopkins verbal learning first, read them in a set of words in different semantic categories, and then they repeat them back. We do that first, and then to measure the delayed recall, you have to wait 20 minutes. So we thought, well, we just administer a bunch of other tests during that 20-minute time period. And then as they're leaving, hey, John, remember those list of words I read you 20 minutes ago? Can you recall any of those? Right? And so that's how we did it. The stopwatch, and then this is a Halstead finger tapper. And you put it's hard to see exactly, but you put your index finger on that, and you do 3 10-second rounds of jamming this thing pulling a lever as fast as you can. The faster you do it, basically the more acute your motor skills are. It's a good way of measuring brain injury or brain trauma, because people who have brain trauma go pretty slow. So you're all back. About brain trauma. Sometimes I'll talk to my students and I'll say, okay, everybody, let's see how you're doing. Are you paying attention to us? So, and the stopwatch is lots of pencils and lots of coffee. And my very old iPhone 4, I think, which tells you something. So this is the exam room. We also videotaped. Well, no, we don't do video anymore. I'm showing my age. We videoed the exams, all the pre-test and then the post-test. We did 3 post-tests right after they were tased, 60 minutes later, and then a week later to see what the trail off was. And we recorded those because we had enough people so that we had 3 exam rooms, and we funneled people through. You know, they were in the waiting room. We'd go call them, and one of us would say, open up the envelope and say, you're in the taser group, or you're in the exertion group, or you're in the taser plus the exertion group, or I hate to tell you, you have to sit out in the waiting room now for the next, 40 minutes. So the first thing they did was they did a cardiac. We P-tested them for pregnancy and drugs, and pregnancy because there were about 30% of our sample was women. And after that, we pre-tested them, and then we administered whatever treatment we were going to administer to them. And because we had 3 different rooms going, 3 exam rooms going, we wanted to make sure that A, everybody stuck to the same script, and B, everybody adhered to the required timing, required by these tests. For the Hopkins verbal learning, the speed with which you read the words should be 1 second apart. Okay, and you don't repeat words. It's a process that so in order to keep it systematic, everybody's got to be the same. That's why we taped. And we had not taped, video. We had a video recorder in every exam room, and at the end of the day, we would adjourn to somebody's house. There may have been beverages involved, I can't remember, but we would then watch the tapes, and you make fun of each other. You look like but we would see, and then there are times we'd have to say, okay, Justin, you're going too fast. You have to slow down a little bit. Just a tiny bit, half second. Or me, I tend to talk fast when I've had a lot of coffee. So like, Rob, don't drink coffee before you go into the room because you're talking too fast. And that was a way for us to just kind of gauge the reliability, or maintain as much as possible the reliability. This is the taser room. A funny thing happens when you get tased. You scream the F word really, really loud, okay? It's like an involuntary response. It doesn't matter who you are, you scream the F word really loud. And so we had to, our challenge was to find a room in the hospital where people could scream and not be heard, okay? Because the last thing you want, it's the Milgram experiment, the last thing you want is to hear, you're here in the waiting room reading your magazine or Snapchatting or whatever you're doing, and you hear, that's not a good thing. So we're like, okay, and we would we'd go there like on a Friday, and when we were first setting up the workflow, I'd stand in the waiting room and scream, I'd go to some of the rooms like the exam room, scream, and see if people could hear me in the waiting room. And that's how scientific this was. So we discovered that the X-ray room was the room where we could close the door and the person could scream all day long, and no one was, there's a certain morbid charm to all this. It's a little like Frankenstein, like, okay, let's find the quietest room here so we can do whatever we want to people and no one else is ever going to hear it. But, these are the realities of doing this kind of work. So this is the X-ray room. There's our black mat. That's the bag they kicked. The funny thing about the bag was we initially said, okay, we'll have people kick the bag for 40 seconds. That's going to mimic fighting. And one of the cops, we had a police officer. We had 2 police officers on the advisory committee. They said, 40 seconds? No. People don't fight for 40 seconds. They don't have the energy to fight for 40 seconds. Okay? No one has unless you're a professional fighter, no one has the energy to fight for 40 seconds. Like, now, come on, you're crazy. So, we're these tough guys. We started punching that back. 20 seconds, I'm like bending over, so we reduced it to 20 seconds. Because that's about the length of time your average person fights with the police, if they're going to fight. So that's the bag they punched. That's the map we used to lay them down, and you can get a better picture. And this is the taser. This is actually the taser we own. It's in a lockbox at Arizona State. Up here is the picture. Oh, okay. So there you go. Up here is the alligator clip right there. So that's how we just put it on. Okay. So we laid the students down, and you might be asking yourself, did people really volunteer for this study? And the answer is, they not only volunteered, 2 students, when they found out at the hospital that they weren't in the taser group, they left. Okay? They left, and it totally peed us off because under our protocols, we still had to pay them. You know, because it's a non-coercive, look, come, you get paid. It doesn't, if you don't finish, you don't finish, because we had to really err on the side of not coercing people to do this. We initially thought we'd have to pay them like $350, and our funder said, you can't do that. No student can reasonably turn down $350, okay? You need to make it low enough. I think it was $175 what we ended up actually paying them. And so yeah, we had 2 students leave. The funniest story, I'll end in just a second, but there's a funny story that I always tell that just gives you a sense. I love college students. They just crack me up. They're, you know, a lot of us are professors, and you get in front of your class and you talk to them, and it's a funny little group. I mean, you know, they're making their way. They're young adults, and they're interesting people. And so I had this kid named Connor. And my nephew's name was Connor. He kind of looked like my nephew, so I had an affinity for Connor. He's a nice kid, and he comes in, and you know, it's kind of like the TSA. He had to put his cell phone and his keys in this thing so that we could. And he was getting tased and doing the exertion, and he was totally fine with it. But I see as he's going to kick the bag, I see his phone ring, and it says "Mom" on there. I'm like, oh, you know, I'm not going to be the guy, okay, who denies a kid to talk to his mom right before we tase him. And so I said, Connor, it's your mom. You gotta take this call. And I thought the mom was calling because she was going to tell him, no, you're not doing this. I thought he must have told her, you know, what was going on. But it turns out that's not the case. She called just to see if he ate food today. You know, I mean, and I can totally see that. But it was like, so he's on the phone with her, and he's like, yeah, Mom, I ate. You know, blah blah blah. And she goes, good. And she goes, well, where are you right now? And he goes, oh, I'm about ready to get tased by my professors. And she's like, what? No, Connor, you're not getting tased. What is this? You know, he's like, no, it's a research study. I'm getting paid for it. And she's like, you're not, Connor, grab your keys. You leave right now. And he says, no, Mom, I really want to do it. And so the dad gets on the phone. And I thought, and I'm looking, I can hear this. And I'm looking at Connor, and I'm saying, dude, you better go home. This is not. And the dad says, Connor, you get your keys and you leave. And he says, I can't, Dad. This is great. It's going to be so awesome. And because he's like, I'm in a fraternity. The stories I'm going to have on Friday night, I'm going to outcompete all my buddies. No problem. And so the dad's like, Connor, go home. And he says, no, I'm not going home. And finally the dad says, Connor, how much are they paying you? And he goes, 170. He looks at me, Dr. King, how much are you? I said, 175. 175. And the dad's like, I will put $175 in your bank account today if you walk out of there. And he's like, nah, I really don't want it. 200. The dad went to 250, okay? Before Connor said, no. So he did it, and he said, hang up the phone. And I said, you sure you want to do this? He's like, of course I do. So he was a fraternity guy, a nice one. And his buddy also, his other fraternity brother also, his name was Drew, and he was in there as well. Not at the same time, but he went to, so Connor does his thing, gets tased, he's screaming the F word like everybody else does, and when he's done, the first thing he says is, did Drew scream as loud as I did? Like, what's the right answer? Do you want to say, do you want us to say yes or no? It was really funny. That's the kind of mentality we were dealing with. People wanted to be in the study because, how many people get to go to college? And you have that, I guess, for a while. And, all right, so that was how we pulled it off. Once we were done, we started to get pretty good news coverage. I'm still annoyed a little bit because we sent our first paper to Science, and Science rejected it simply on the basis that they didn't think it had broad enough appeal. Okay, and yet, just in the last year alone, I've been covered by CBS News, NBC National News. I was in Time Magazine with this stuff earlier in the year, February. You know, we've gotten international coverage, so I'm a little annoyed still at Science. But we published some good pieces. This piece here just came out. Mike White and I are the two policing guys, and so we're mostly interested in the accountability stuff. So this just came out in our leading crime policy journal, and this was actually the one for which we won the award for the I guess the most whatever interesting or best RCT conducted. But it's starting to get traction out there, and police departments are starting to talk about about this. I've spoken with a lot of cops. It's interesting because the administrators will tell you they liked it. The cops on the street think we're, communists. And I will say this, I think the taser is a remarkable device. I've said this on the air, I've said this to people who want to listen. I think it's a remarkable device, particularly as an alternative to deadly force. The evidence is out there that demonstrates pretty clearly that the taser has led to fewer shootings. My problem with the taser is not the taser. It's how it's being deployed in American police departments, because we tase people. It's no longer an alternative to deadly force. Now it's essentially used as a pain compliance technique, which is not. That's a whole other conversation, but it's not. All right. So that's kind of where we are on that. I started this conversation very quickly with 6 cops around a water cooler. That's a very disciplinary approach to the crime problem. What happens though if we keep one of the cops, get a nurse, a teacher, an entrepreneur, a letter carrier, and a general contractor around the same water cooler to ask the question how you solve the crime problem? You're going to get highly varied responses. Yeah, you need some cops out there to keep people safe. But people come to school feeling pretty junky. They need to eat before they come to school. We need to have primary care. Sometimes we need to have primary care in the schools for these kids because of the home environment or the neighborhood they're in. People need to feel good. The letter carrier knows who's home, knows where the cracks are in the sidewalk. They know everything about your neighborhood. And a contractor can look at the built environment and make suggestions that can help us in a non-intrusive way reduce crime as well. Interdisciplinary teams solve problems that by themselves disciplines probably can't when it comes to these complex issues in modern society. Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry.